A gute Woche. This afternoon, the Rebbe Zalgazunza began the Farbrengen that today is Shabbos Parshas Vayigash. And together with it, it is also Tes Tevis, 9 days in the month of Tevis. Now, Shabbos Parshas Vayigash does not necessarily have to come out the day before Asara B'Tevis, which is what Tes Tevis is. Shabbos Vayigash could come out on a different day. This year, however, we have a combination of Shabbos Parshas Vayigash and Tes Tevis, which Tes Tevis is the day before Asara B'Tevis, which means that right from Shabbos we are entering right away into Asara B'Tevis. And the Rebbe continued right away regarding Asara B'Tevis. Asara B'Tevis is a very special time. It's the day that Yerushalayim was surrounded. And the Pasuk uses the expression Be'etzem hayoim hazeh. It was in the middle of this day that Yerushalayim was surrounded. Says the Rebbe, in Halacha it's brought that being that the expression here regarding Asara B'Tevis is Be'etzem hayoim hazeh, in the middle of the day. Regarding Yom Kippur, we also find an expression Be'etzem hayoim hazeh. And we know in the Torah there's a concept of comparing when we find a similar expression. So we compare Asara B'Tevis to Yom Kippur. Just like Yom Kippur, should Yom Kippur fall out to be on a Shabbos, we fast. The same, should Asara B'Tevis come out to be on a Shabbos, we would fast on Asara B'Tevis, which is an exception amongst the Tanaisim of Shavasa B'Tammuz, Tisha B'Av. In other words, all Tanaisim, except Yom Kippur, we do not fast on Shabbos. And here we are told that Asara B'Tevis is an exception. However, in today's calendar, the calendar which we have today, in other words, we are with a fixed calendar, a set calendar, Asara B'Tevis cannot come out to be on Shabbos. But in the times when they were setting the new months al pi hariyah, based on when two witnesses would come and tell Bezdin that they just saw the new moon, and based on that the Chodesh would be set, Bezdin would proclaim the new month, then it was definitely possible for Asara B'Tevis to come out to be on a Shabbos, and if Asara B'Tevis came out on Shabbos, we would fast on Asara B'Tevis. Now the question arises, says the Rebbe, what was after the Churban of the Beis HaMikdash? After the Churban of the Beis HaMikdash, for a period of time, there was still Batei Dinim, there was still Jewish Bezdin, Jewish courts, and the system of setting the new month based on witness was still going on. So obviously, if it was still going on then they would also be fasting on Shabbos should Asara B'Tevis come out on Shabbos. Furthermore, says the Rebbe, now that Asara B'Tevis cannot come out on a Shabbos, but it can come out on Friday. We've had Asara B'Tevis on Friday. When Asara B'Tevis comes out to be on a Friday, then we do not finish the fast until we are already into the Shabbos. And we know that regarding Shabbos, any minute of Shabbos, we are not allowed to be in a fast. In other words, an accepted tonus in Shabbos is prohibited. So if we fast on Friday, and we do not break the fast till we are entering into Shabbos, till after Ma'ariv of Kabbalah Shabbos, until after we make Kiddush Friday night. So that means that the Bein Hashmoshes of Shabbos, or not even the not only the Bein Hashmoshes, even more than that, the time, the first beginning of the Shabbos, we are still officially in a fast. And this is the exception only for Asara B'Tevis. Because Asara B'Tevis has this strength within it, that it is compared to Yom Kippur. Furthermore, being that Asara B'Tevis is so strong, stronger than Shiva Asar B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av. So we must say, ultimately we are hoping that these days of fast will all be converted to days of Sasan and Simcha, to days of Yontif. So Memela, we must say that the day of Yontif, which we are hoping for that Asara B'Tevis will be converted into, once we go out of Golus, when Golus stops, Golus ends, and Mashiach comes, the Yontif of Asara B'Tevis will be a stronger one than the Yontif of the other fast days. All fast days will be converted into Yom Tevim. However, being that it is stronger as a fast day, it will also be stronger as a Yontif.
Tisha B'Av. I mean, even Tisha B'Av.
Even stronger than Tisha B'Av, right? And the Rebbe says again, Bechlal, today is the day before the Tanis, but it still has a very strong relation to the Tanis. Because Bechlal, what's the whole Indian of a Tanis? So the Rambam writes, what is a fast all about? Fast primarily is to awaken us to tshuva. What is the Indian of Shabbos? Shabbos also has a very obvious shaykhus to tshuva. And it's so obvious that the word Shabbos itself contains the same letters as Toshev, as tshuva. So Mamela, the shaykhus between Shabbos and tshuva is very obvious. And here the Rebbe mentions also that there's brought in Chazal that Adam Marishan did tshuva on Shabbos. Adam sinned on Friday. So after sinning on Friday, Shabbos was the first opportunity he had. That was the first day he had to do tshuva. Memela, Shabbos is a day, an appropriate day that has a shaykhus to tshuva. So this strengthens yet more the relationship between Shabbos and Asara B'Tevis, because the Indian of a fast is Inyonui tshuva, and the same thing when we're talking about Shabbos, Shabbos also has a very strong relation to the concept of tshuva. Why take? Is there something so special in Asara B'Tevis more than in all other days, more than in all other fast days? So here the Rebbe brings out that the specialty in Asara B'Tevis is, Bichlal we know, what was the reason for the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash? The reason for Churban was the lack of Avos Yisrael. Being that Yidden were lacking Avos Yisrael, there was no proper love from one to another. And Avos Yisrael, this is the foundation of the entire Torah, as we know. Famous expression in Gemara when the Gentile came to Shammai and he told him he should teach him the entire Torah on 1 foot, and he told him it's impossible. Then when he came to Hillel and he told him, whatever is hated upon yourself, don't do to somebody else, which basically is the Indian of Avos Yisrael. Just told it to him in the negative way. Chassidus explains why he told it to him this way, but regardless, the contents of it is, he told him Avos Yisrael. Avos Yisrael is the entire Torah, and the basics of Torah, and everything else is a commentary. Everything else in Torah is a perush, is a commentary on Avos Yisrael. Rabbi Akiva uses the famous expression, Avos Yisrael is kol ha-Torah kula. It's the equivalent to the entire Torah. Rabbi mentions that the Yerushalmi tells us, the Talmud Yerushalmi we find, an interpretation on Avos Yisrael. But what's the pshat Avos Yisrael? Avos Yisrael is, just like a person cannot differentiate within his own body. A person will say that he likes his right hand and does not like his left hand, or vice versa. It's ridiculous. A person cannot say that. A person will have a liking to one part of the body and a hatred to the other part of the body. The same thing, the Yerushalmi says this. All of Klal Yisrael are compared to one body, one koyim shleima. And therefore, Avos Yisrael has to be exercised to each and every Yid. Why? Because each and every Yid is part of one body. And we cannot divide and say that I will have a love to one part of the body and I will not like the other part of the body. This is how the Yerushalmi views Avos Yisrael. So Mamela Avos Yisrael is extremely vital for the existence of Klal Yisrael. And here, Yidden were lacking it, and Yidden were lacking it to such an extent that this is what led to the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Prior to that came Asara B'Tevis, and Asara B'Tevis is the day when Samach Melech Bavel al Yerushalayim, which means the king of Bavel has surrounded Yerushalayim. And what has accomplished when the city was surrounded? Ein yoytze ve'ein ba. Nobody was given permission to leave. Nobody was given permission to enter. Neither the people, neither their belongings, neither anything that has a shaykhs to them. In other words, what did Asara B'Tevis accomplish? What Asara B'Tevis really accomplished was a unity amongst all the people that were in Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim, Yirei Sholem. Yerushalayim is composed of two words. The highest level of Yira, God-fearing. Ki'ir shechubra lo yachtov. It's the city that's attaching the people within it all together. And by the people being surrounded, not being let out, what was accomplished? It was accomplished that all the people inside Yerushalayim were united. Being that this is what Asara B'Tevis accomplished, that is why Asara B'Tevis is so effective, is so strong, that on Dafkan this tanis we say, Be'etzem hayoyim hazeh. The expression here is used Be'etzem, as we explained earlier, same expression which we find by Yom Kippur, and it is compared to Yom Kippur, and it has the strength of Yom Kippur that should have come out on Shabbos. We fast on Shabbos. All why? Because as a result, as an outcome of Asara B'Tevis, what happens when people are surrounded in a city? This is symbolic to the concept that the people within the city are united, because they cannot part one from another. There are all those that are in the city are united together. And when we're talking on this Inyan, how when a person is in the city and his belongings are right next to him, they can also not part from him because the city was surrounded. So the Rebbe ties this in what we find by Shabbos. Shabbos, we're in the middle of the day of Shabbos, so Shabbos affects not only the person, but it affects his belongings as well. To the extent that there are even halachas of Shabbos that affect the person's belongings. And regarding Shabbos, this is how the first Mishnah, Masechta Shabbos, begins. The Mishnah, Masechta Shabbos, wants to explain the Isser of Hitzah, the Isser of the probation of carrying on Shabbos. It is explained with a parable of a poor person and a balabas and a rich person, the rich person giving out tzedakah to the poor person. And the question is if he's allowed to give from the pass over from the Rishus HaYachid into the Rishus HaRabim, which is not allowed to be done on Shabbos. Because Shabbos we are not allowed to carry from one Rishus, from one area to another area. But again, like the Rebbe is using this, what do we see? When we're talking in Shabbos also, it's brought out the same concept. You have the Balabayis, the person who is ready to contribute to tzedakah. He has his belongings, his valuables with him, next to him. He has access to them, so that when a poor person comes, he can give it to him. And in such a case, the first Mishnah of Masechta Shabbos portrays the halachas of the probation of carrying on Shabbos. You're talking about the Indian of tzedakah. Mishnah describes there's a poor person and there's a balabas, who's the balabas who's giving the tzedakah. We know, Chazal tell us that Yoiser more than what the giver, the donor, is doing to the recipient. The recipient is really doing more for the donor. Why? Because it is through the giving of tzedakah that the one who is given tzedakah is really blessed. And the Rebbe brought out today, says, when we give tzedakah, when you give charity, we're supposed to make sure to it that we provide the needs of the recipient. However, Chazal tell us, there's no mitzvah when you give somebody tzedakah to make the recipient rich. Give him whatever he needs. He should have whatever he needs. In fact, the Gemara describes if the person was once wealthy and he had all types of conveniences, make sure that he has them again. But to bring him back, to bring a person to wealth, this is not mitzvah tzedakah. However, the person who gives tzedakah, the pasuk says, "Aser asrenu loch," that the Rebbe says that he will reward the one who is giving the tzedakah. He will reward him with wealth, with ashiras. So who is gaining more? Naturally, the one who's giving. Because the one who's giving, he will be rewarded with wealth from the Rebbe. The one who's receiving cannot come to wealth because tzedakah limits. There's a limitation in tzedakah that we are talking to provide the person with all of his needs, however, not to bring him to ashiras. There's no mitzvah giving tzedakah and making somebody rich. However, the one who gives the tzedakah is promised by the Rebbe, Aser asrenu loch, it will come to ashiras, it will bring him to wealth. So Memela, this leads us to understand why Yoser mimasha balabayis oiser ma'oni, oni oiser ma'balabayis, the oni, the recipient of the tzedakah, accomplishes more for the giver than the giver accomplishes for the one who's receiving the tzedakah from. The Rebbe concluded this whole inyan to let us hope that Mashiach could come even today. And Mela, we will continue the whole inyan of Asara B'Tevis will be continued already with Mashiach, and will not be a day of fast any longer. We will be able to celebrate Asara B'Tevis in a format of Yehafech L'Sasein L'Simcha. It will be converted into a day of joy and happiness. The Rebbe continued in the Farbrengen regarding the Siyam HaRambam. For those who learn Rambam 3 Prakim daily, tomorrow, Asara B'Tevis, is the Siyam, is the completion of the 5th year of learning Rambam, and then the beginning of the 6th year, entering the 6th year of learning Rambam, since the Rebbe has instituted the takana of learning Rambam on a daily basis. And as it is customary on a Siyam, that the Rebbe explains in Inyan, which the Rambam says at the end of the Sefer, and also ties in the beginning with the end. The beginning of the Yad HaChazaka and the end of the Yad HaChazaka. We all know what the Sefer HaRambam is all about. What the Rambam really accomplished was that he has written the Sefer that includes all inyanim of Torah. Everything of Torah is included, as the Rambam himself writes in the preface to the Sefer, that a person can learn all of Chamisha Chumsha Torah, and after learning Chumash, can go over to his Sefer and he will have a complete Yidiyah, complete knowledge of every area in Torah. The Rambam in the last Prakim, first of all, brings out a halacha regarding shoygeg. We know there's a concept of shoygeg and mezid. Mezid means when we do an avera intentionally. Shoygeg means when we do it not intentionally. So the question arises, was meint not intentional? Does not intentionally mean, for example, I have a piece of chaylev in front of me, which is treif, and however, I did not know that this is chaylev. That's one way of learning shoygeg. I don't know. I thought it's meat. Another way of learning shoygeg is a person who did not know the isur. I didn't know that this is prohibited. I did not know this is not permitted to be done. I was well aware that this is chaylev. However, I do not know that chaylev is also. So we have two categories of shoygeg. And the Rambam brings out that there's a difference whether we're talking about a yid or we're talking about a goy. By a yid, the Rambam says, only one category of shoygeg applies. The category of shoygeg, last chiluk of Rambam around, the last. Okay. I'll do without it. Only one category of shoygeg applies by a Yid. By a non-Jew, however, the Rambam says, both categories, Yaakov, leave. It's okay. It's okay. By a non-Jew, however, by a goy, both categories of shogeg apply. And in both cases is he considered a sheikh. So the Rebbe is asking, obviously this halacha needs a clarification. We know that when a goy is zich megaya, when a goy goes through conversion, it always must become harder on him. As the expression goes, shelo yoimru, we should not say he has come from a kedusha, from something which was more, where it was more machmir, and now once he became a yid, he'll be less machmir. It doesn't work that way. Yidden have more chumras. There's more details and it's more halachas involved in being a yid than until now. Let me illustrate it with an example. If a goy became Gershen is Gaya, Kikotten Shenoilo Dami. That's the concept that a ger who becomes a ger is considered just like a newborn infant. And therefore, based on this halacha, it separates him from all his relatives. There's no longer a relation to all the goyim who he was related to prior to him becoming a ger. Why? Very simple. He's no longer related to them because he's kikotten shenei l'dam. He's like a new infant that was just born. So the question arises, is he permitted to marry a woman who was his sister before he became a ger? So the Gemara says, no, he is not allowed to. She's no longer his sister. Shelo yoimru, we should not say that he came from a kedusha chamura lekedusha kala. Prior to that, while he was a goy, he was not allowed to marry her. Because by goyim there's also dinam of arayis. Now we are going to say, once he became a yid, the person who was prohibited to him before should become mutter now. It doesn't work that way. The same thing the Rebbe is asking, how can we learn regarding the halachas of shogeg, that for a goy there are more complications, there are more categories of shogeg for a goy than there are for a yid? What's going to be should this goy decide to become a geir? How is it going to work out then? This is something which the Rebbe left unanswered. Then the Rebbe went further to the last halach of the Rambam. Last program of the Rambam, actually the Rambam describes what the world will be like when Mashiach will come. Till the Rambam comes to the conclusion, the last words of the Rambam, that when Mashiach will come, it will be Umallah ha'oretz deyas Hashem kamayim layom mechasim. The world will be full with wisdom, with knowledge, knowing about the Rebishter, just like water covers kamayim layom mechasim, just like water covers the ocean. So first of all, the Rebbe is asking, what's the halacha in this? The Rambam is a sefer of halachas. What is the Rambam describing what the world will be like when Mashiach will come? How the world will be full of wisdom? What shaykhs does this have to halacha? Also, if we go a little more in detail, here the Rambam tells us what the world will be like when Mashiach will come, and he brings the pasuk of Umallah ha'oretz deyas Hashem. The world will be full with wisdom, with knowledge of the Rebishter, godliness, kamayim layom mechasim. In the Rambam and Hilchas Tshuva, the Rambam also brings how the world can be elevated, and brings the pasuk Umallah ha'oretz deyas Hashem. However, does not bring the last part of the pasuk kamayim layom mechasim. Why is it that in Hilchas Shuvah he brings half of the pasuk, the world will be full with wisdom, Deya es Hashem, and here when it comes to the description what the world will be like when Mashiach will come, here the Rambam concludes, Kamayim layom mechasim, the world will be full with wisdom, to such an extent, just like water covers the ocean, the same way the world will be full with Deya es Hashem. And here the Rebbe let in to explain it. Contents of the explanation was, first of all, we know a famous expression in the Zohar, Istakel be'araiso bora alma. The Rebbe looked into Torah and created the world. In other words, the Torah was the blueprint for the Rebbe for the creation of the world. So here the Rebbe brings a vote from the Frierdiker Rebbe, indirectly. The Frierdiker Rebbe says that before a Yid does something, he should act the same way. Just like the Rebbe. Before he went to create the world, he looked into Torah. Before we do something, also check with Torah, look into Torah if what we are doing is in accordance to Torah. Should it be done or should it not be done? Or how should it be done? In other words, Torah is constantly a guide for a Yid, guiding him in everything in this world. A Yid will always find guidance in Torah, how he should go about certain things. Everything, not only certain things, everything. Memela, the Rebbe doing things the same way. The Rebbe is going to be uplifting the world to a level of Umallah Ha'aretz Deyas Hashem. This is also a halacha in Torah. How can it happen? Only because it is a halacha in Torah. Just like the Rebbe when he created the world. How was Yehi Rakia created? How was Yehi Oyer created? All because Istakel Be'eraisel Bara Alma, he looked into Torah, and from Torah it was created. The same, there is a halacha that it will be Umallah Ha'aretz Deyas Hashem. This will lead to it that it will be that way. So Torah Paschals creates that this is how it should be. Deeper, the Rebbe brought out that Bechlal, when a Yid is aware of his Yehudim, of the schar, of the reward that's awaiting him, this in itself is a whole lengthy explanation in the Rambam. What's the whole union of schar, of reward for doing a mitzvah? Actually, why should we seek reward? And the Rambam explains that really it's not an union of reward. Reward we will get in the world to come. The Gashmiistic reward that's discussed in Torah, or the same what the world will be like when Mashiach will come, all of that, the Rambam says, this is simply to make it convenient for a person, to make it easy on a Yid, that a Yid should be able to be Mekayim, fulfill Torah and mitzvahs. When a Yid is rewarded, as we read, take for example the beginning of Pashas B'chukoisei. In B'chukoisei teleichu, then the Rebbe promises, "V'nasati gishmeichem beitam." How does the Baal Shem Tov teach? Doesn't only mean rain. Gishmeichem is maloshen gashmius. A Yid is rewarded when a Yid has all his gashmius is taken care of, all his gashmius is provided. Then it's naturally much easier on him to fulfill the B'chukoisei teleichu v'smitzvosei tishmeiru, to be able to sit and learn and fulfill mitzvahs. So again, the schar, the reward which the Rebbe gives for fulfilling mitzvahs, the reward which we get in Gashmius, not about the reward, not talking about in Yonim of Elam Haba, the world to come and all that. We're talking about the schar which comes, the schar Gashmi, as well as whatever the world will be like when Mashiach will come. All of this is Pashat. A Yid should know about it, because simply this is it's a halacha, because this is kind of like an incentive for a Yid to be able to fulfill Torah mitzvahs. When a Yid knows that all of this is about to happen, this is negayah to his commitment to Torah mitzvahs. And now the Rebbe is mekasher the beginning of the Rambam and the end of the Rambam. Rambam begins, we all know, Yud Kei Vav Kei, with the Rebbe's name, Yesoid HaYesoidos V'Amud HaChochmos. It's the foundation of all wisdom, the pillar of all wisdom, to know of the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then the Rambam goes on in the second halacha. Second halacha of his Sefer, the Rambam continues, Ve'im Yala Ladas. And if one is going to think, Shehu Einei Motzui, that the Rebbe Ein Davar Achar Yochel Lehi Motzis, then nothing else can exist. What is the Rambam really out to explain here? First, the Rambam tells us general foundation. Yisoid HaYisoidus V'Amud HaChachmos is to know that there is an existence of the Rabbeinu Shalom. Then and everything that exists comes from him. Everything is Ma'amitis Himotzi, from the truth of his existence. Then the Rambam goes, V'im Yala Ladas, if one is going to say Shehu Einei Motzui, Ein Davar Achar Yochel Lehi Motzis, then we should know that nothing else can exist. If there's no existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, nothing else can exist. Basically, Rebbe got involved in depth in Chassidus to explain the beginning of the Rambam here and tie it in with the end of the Rambam. What the Rebbe is bringing out in the Kude contents, basically, is Bechlal, what we are used to, is we are used to understand Umola ha'aretz deya is something which we can understand. What's the title Umola ha'aretz deya? The world will become full with wisdom. Haste is there is an aretz, there is a world, there is aretz. But we say Umola ha'aretz deya es Hashem, that the world will become full with das es Hashem. When we are referring to kamayim layom mechasim, here we are already talking a much deeper level. What's the touch kamayim layom mechasim? Kamayim layom mechasim means just like water covers the ocean. The same way the world will be covered with Gettlichkeit, will be filled with Gettlichkeit. When water covers the ocean, we do not see the ocean. In other words, it takes away the existence of the ocean, cannot be seen. So when we're talking here in Ruchnias, Kamayim layom mechasim is a much higher madrege than Umola ha'aretz deya. Umola ha'aretz deya is the taich. We still feel aretz, we feel gashmias, but we say this gashmias will be full with deyas Hashem. When we say Kamayim layom mechasim is the taich, we do not see yom, we do not see the gashmias of the thing. All that is seen and felt and breathed is all Gettlichkeit. Or, in other words, there's the concept of lemata yesh or lamayla ayin. Anything which we come into contact with lemata is yesh. We see that, we feel that yesh. The ayin of lemala we do not feel. We know that it is here, but we don't feel it. Naturally, when we say knowing, there are various levels of knowing. Knowing is something which is very relative. We find certain people, what they know is gashmias. Other people, all what they know is dvar seichel, an intellectual dvar seichel. That is what their realm of knowledge goes into. Something which can be very much varying from madrege to madrege. V'meila, when the Rambam is talking in Hilchos Shuvah, and he's bringing out how a person can uplift himself to a madrege, take it to a madrege, but what madrege? The madrege of a Umola ha'aretz deya. No more than that. When the Rambam is talking at the end of his sefer, that is when a person has gone through the entire Torah already. And we know that Torah has within itself hamoya sheba, the lichtigkeit of Torah, which is machzirah lemutav, which just brings a person to good. In other words, there's certain levels where a person can be very familiar in Torah and very well learned in Torah, however the Torah will not have an effect on him, as far as his commitment to maises, commitment to mitzvahs. However, there are levels in Torah when a person really goes through Torah. Here he's come to the madrega of hamoya sheba, the lichtigkeit within Torah, which is machzirah lamutav, which brings him to the good. Here a yid can come, and this is what the world will be like when Mashiach will come. Then not only will it be Umola ha'aretz deya, then it's the final and climax point of the Avodah. Then it will be Umola ha'aretz deya Hashem, kemayim layom mechasim. There will be no Gashmis will not be felt. Nishtataych, there is a Gashmi, and the Gashmi is led by the Rebishter. And what do we feel and what do we see? Only Gashmi is. However, we know that there's an Rebishter behind all that. Then we will be at a much higher level. At what madrega will the world be when Mashiach will come? All we will see and breathe and look at will be Gettlichkeit. And that's why when the Rambam, last chelik of the Rambam, Hilchos Mulchamis or Mulchameseim, which the very last prokim, Rebbe says many editions of the Rambam, the very last prokim where the Rambam gives a description of the coming of Mashiach, in many editions that these prokim are referred to the halachas of Mashiach. And in the halachas of Mashiach, that's where the Rambam says, there a person can come to a level, not only of Molah Deus Hashem, there he comes to the level of Molah Deus Hashem Kamayim Layom Mechasim. There he comes to a level that he realizes that godliness is filling up the entire world. Not the pshat, there is a world, and this world is controlled by the Rebishter, and the Rebishter is hidden. And what you feel is Oretz. But to Molah HaOretz, there's Hashem. Much more than that. Kamayim Layom Mechasim. All of Gashmias is not seen. All of Gashmias is not felt. What do we feel? We feel only a Lakus. We feel only Getlichkeit. This is what the Rambam says. The Rebbe is trying to get into the second halacha, in the beginning of the Rambam. Im yala ladas shehu eina matzu. If one is going to think that there is no existence of the Rebishter, ein davaracha yochel imotzis, then nothing else can exist. In other words, one is up to the madrege of realizing that nothing else can exist. What exists? Only Getlichkeit. This is basically the contents of Siyam HaRambam, which the Rebbe spoke about, and the Rebbe spoke very warmly that tomorrow there will be a Siyam HaRambam celebration instead of 70, which is a mere fact it's in a shul. What's the whole union of a Beis HaKnesses? A Beis HaKnesses is a shul which unites people. That's the whole union of a shul, especially when it's in this shul. This is the shul where the Frierdiker Rebbe was, the Yizdal Adamis. Frierdiker Rebbe spent the last 10 years of his life, which is a very dear and precious place, so it's definitely something very meaningful and something very significant. At the end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe referred to the beginning of this week's Sedra. The Sedra begins with Vayigash Elov Yehuda. Yehuda went close to Yosef, and what does Rashi say? That Yehuda commented to Yosef, Yichnesu dvorai be'oznecha. What I am going to say to you should go into your ears. What's Rashi explaining here? So what Rashi is quoting is Vayigash Elov and Davar ba'oznei Adoni. So there are some that want to learn that why does Rashi quote the words Vayigash Elov? This is an indication in Rashi that the new Seder is just beginning. The Rebbe says we cannot learn that way, we cannot accept this. Why? Because this is not Rashi's practice. Rashi does not have a practice at the beginning of every Sedra to quote the first word or two from the Sedra. So if Rashi doesn't do it in other Sedras, he's not doing it here either. Rashi does quote Vayigash Elov, and then skips a few words of the Pasuk and continues Dova ba'oznei Adoni, because Rashi is explaining what's really happening. Rashi is not teaching the word of Vayigash. The word the literal taich of Vayigash, this is not what Rashi is concerned with right now. What Rashi is really explaining is what's happening here. Here we're in the middle of a dialogue between Yosef and his brothers. And all of a sudden, Yehuda wants to say something, and he wants to bring the message across to Yosef to make sure that Yosef hears him very well. This is the Vayigash Elov. And the Vayigash is in such a way that he's saying, Dova ba'oznei Adoni. What's meant ba'oznei? What does he mean by the ear? He wants to speak to his ear. Everything that's spoken to a person is spoken to one's ear. What does it mean, Dova ba'oznei Adoni? When you speak, the ears hear. How does a person hear? He hears through his ears. Otherwise, what's the person stressing? Dova ba'oznei Adoni. But Yehuda was the one who really felt responsible for what's going on here. Yehuda took responsibility from his father Yaakov to release Binyamin. Anoichi venu miyadi tevakshenu. I'm the one that's responsible for him. From my hands, you will ask him back. Memela, Yehuda is really feeling responsible and annoyed for what's going on here. So Yehuda's bringing into wants to say something to Yosef and make sure that Yosef really hears him. When you want to make sure that one really hears you, you use the expression ba'oznei Adoni. In the ears of my master I will say something. What's meant? So Rebbe illustrates it two examples. There's a halacha. Chirshoi noisein de mei kuloi. If a person, a master that owned a slave, servant, and he bet him to such an extent that he made him deaf. Chirshoi, he made him deaf. Cheresh. Yes. He lost his power of hearing. Noisein de mei kuloi. In halacha we find there are various ways of paying when an eved was beaten by his master. There are various levels of compensation. Chirshoi, if he made him deaf, he has to pay the full amount as if he had killed him. He's a living person. And if he made him an invalid in other areas, he doesn't have to pay such a price. Why? Because if he made him deaf, then he's useless. An oizen is something which ties into etzem nefesh, the essence of a person's life, of his neshama. That is why there's another expression. We also find it, in fact, by an eved. By an eved, we find an eved that wants to stay longer than 6 years and serve his master. So what does the Torah tell us in Parshas Mishpatim? That he's taken over to the door and he's treated in his ear. So what does Rashi explain? Rashi explains on behalf of the Gemara, Oizen Sheshana B'Har Sinai. This ear that heard at Har Sinai, that we are slaves to, we have to serve the Rebishter, and here this individual wants to go and serve somebody else, so this ear has to be punished. Why ear? The eye also saw at Har Sinai. Everything heard at Har Sinai. We know by Har Sinai the eye saw, the ears heard, all parts of the body.
Yeah, right. Yeah, okay.
All parts of the body participated. And everything participated when the Rebishter addressed the Aseres HaDibros. In fact, the Rebbe mentioned what's brought in Chazal. First, all of Klal Yisrael heard the Aseres HaDibros together. Then they heard each and every Dibur separately. So why do Chazal stress dafke oizen sheshama al Har Sinai, the ear that heard on Har Sinai? Why? Because it seems that the ear is something which relates to the etzem nefesh, to the essence of the person's nefesh, the essence of the person's neshama. And that is why Vayigash Elov, when Yehuda wanted to say something where he wanted that Yosef should really get the message, what did he say? Yidaber na'avdecho dover ba'oznei Adoni. I will say something which I want your ears to hear. And that is why Vayigash, Rashi quotes Vayigash Elov and continues quoting Dover ba'oznei Adoni, because this Hagosha, this Yehuda's getting close to Yosef was such where he wanted to lace it into Yosef to such an extent. He wanted to bring him a message which he wanted to make sure that he will hear. So he tells him, Yidaber na'avdecha davar ba'oznei Adoni. He wants to say something where he wants to make sure that his master will really grasp what he's saying. To say, I want to address myself, I want the attention of your ears. An ear is something which is extremely, as we just illustrated from these examples, is extremely meaningful. The Rebbe concluded again that those that have submitted mashke, given the mashke to the Rebbe before Shabbos for any type of an occasion, for a siyum of a Masechta or a siyum of a Rambam or any other type of Chassidish Farbrengen, should come up, and the Rebbe gave them all the mashke, and they should all announce and invite everybody to participate in their respective affairs. And as usual, the Rebbe, right afterwards, the Rebbe always begins singing the Nigen of Harakaisi Lachem Bracha. A good tavach.
If a goy can't marry his sister,
Yeah.
and then also goy can't marry a Jew. So if he megayers, if he's usher to marry a Jew.
Okay, listen. I mean, it's within reason. I mean, you can't ask him al kula alma as an exception.
How can you use that to?
He was also to marry a Jew unless he's a megayer. So once he's a megayer, he's allowed to marry a Jew.
Then also his sister, his goyish sister, she megayers, and she's a newborn.
But the sister will be viewed by people will react ba mikdusha chamura l'kedusha kala. He was at a higher level of sanctity before than he is now. And this is something which the Chachamim don't want. A Yiddi is only allowed to marry once he becomes a Ger. When he's a guy, he's not allowed to. He became a Ger, it's time a woman which is no relation, we'll let him go ahead and marry her.
Alpi Rambam, is a Ben Nayach allowed to marry his daughter? places, and some places I saw no, and in other places it seemed yes.